There is a kind of horror deep at the core of Godwyn the Golden's story that I find fascinating, because I've never seen anything quite like it before. He is already long dead by the start of the game, so we have to piece his story together through fragments and small scraps of information. The story that we uncover parallels the story of the Golden Order itself, from its glorious rise to its violent collapse. And then, just like the Golden Order, even after death, he continues to live on, in a sort of monstrous, corrupted half-life that is even more horrific than if he had just died outright in the first place. And, depending on the choices made by the player, again, just like the Golden Order, he can be transformed, reborn in a strange new form. This is something that I'm not sure very many players realize. I don't see people talk about it very often, but you can actually bring Godwyn the Golden back to life. We can witness the moment of his rebirth in the game. However, the form his reborn life takes is so alien and so strange that it's not surprising that most players don't recognize it as life at all at first glance. But that is all part of the horror of Godwyn's story. He is forced to undergo multiple dramatic and hideous transformations against his will, becoming more and more inhuman with each change. So what I'm going to do in this video is piece his story together from beginning to end, to explore this unique and strange form of horror at the center of his character. Godwyn's story is closely tied to the story of the Golden Order at every stage. His story begins with his parents. His mother was Queen Marika, the Eternal, who either seized, stole, or was granted the Elden Ring, a collection of living magical runes of incredible power, enough to transform her into a god. Alongside her husband, Godfrey, who is probably the greatest warrior to have ever lived in this setting, they and their armies conquered the entire lands between, established a new dynasty and a new age, the Golden Order, bathed in the shining golden blessings of the newly born Erd Tree, an age where death was sealed away, so Marika and her children could live forever. Marika and Godfrey had 3 children. The twins, Morgott and Mohg, were born with the twisted bodies of Omen, and so were banished underneath the royal capital. But Godwyn, as far as we know, was born perfect. Worth noting, some fans have theorized otherwise, that, like his brothers, he was also born with a mutated body, and I will discuss that possibility later in the video, but for now, for the sake of this story, we're going to assume that he was born with a normal human body. Moving on, it's very likely that, as the first true son of the new dynasty, his birth would have been celebrated. Historically, the births of healthy royal children were often viewed as a promise of future stability and continuing prosperity. The birth of Godwyn would have solidified the Golden Order in the lands between, would have signaled to the people that this rule, this new way of life, was here to stay. We are only given a few scraps of Godwyn's story, but we can infer some things about his upbringing. He would have grown up in the lap of luxury. He would have never known material want. He would have been educated by the best teachers. He would have been trained by the greatest warriors. With the banishment of his brothers, he would essentially have been an only child, and so would have been the sole focus of Marika and Godfrey's parental attention. Other characters in these circumstances might have grown up arrogant or spoiled, but Godwyn's future exploits suggest otherwise. Instead, he grew up to be a diplomat, into someone who was open-minded, sympathetic, and mature enough to forge friendships in unexpected places. But after a while, cracks would begin to appear in Godwyn's apparently perfect life, just at the same time as the first cracks began to appear in the Golden Order. It all begins with a mysterious controversy. At some point, his father, for reasons that are still not clear, was stripped of grace and driven out of the lands between. Afterwards, his mother unexpectedly quickly remarried. A new husband, Radagon, a champion of the old wars, came into the picture. Radagon brought with him 3 children from his previous marriage, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni. And together with Marika, they had 2 new children, another set of twins, Miquella and Melania, both of whom were marked by strange illnesses or curses, a far cry from the perfection of Godwyn's birth, signaling that something was very wrong wrong with the Golden Order, some deep-seated flaw that had not been recognized before. For Godwyn, this would have been a dramatic change in circumstances. He went from being essentially an only child into one of 6 royal demigod children, from being unique and singular to just one of many. We do not know how Godwyn responded to these changes in his life, whether he mourned the loss of his father, whether he was bothered by the sudden appearance of so many rivals for his mother's attention, or his relationship with his stepfather. But the description of the Golden Epitaph suggests that he at least had a positive relationship with his younger half-brother Mikola. Based on his later exploits, I suspect that Godwyn would have done his best to welcome all of his new siblings into the family, though his cousin Ronnie will eventually murder him, so maybe it wasn't all sunshine and roses. When he reached adulthood, Godwyn presumably had children of his own. In the present day, Godric the Grafted is a distant member of something called the Golden Lineage, which traces itself back to Godfrey, first husband of Queen Marika. And since Godwyn is the only human son of Godfrey, well, that lineage must trace its way through him as well. We do not know anything about the women he had children with or anything about those children, but judging by how weak and depraved Godric is, I suspect that none of Godwyn's children were as impressive as either himself or his parents, that each of them was weaker than the ones who came before, symbolizing the weakening of the dynasty itself. There are also suggestions that Queen Marika was not the most caring of mothers. Throughout our journey in the lands between, our traveling partner, Melina, possibly another sibling of Godwyn, but uncertain, well, she is able to pass on echoes of Marika's past proclamations. In one of these echoes, Marika appears to be speaking directly to her children, including Godwyn, and her words are surprising. Let's listen to them together now, and as you listen, ask yourself, how would you feel if your mother said this to you? Okay, here it is.
Hear me, demigods, my children beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
So, Marika is telling her children, go be anything you want to be, follow your dreams, become a god if you want, anything is possible. And isn't that a nice thing to hear from your mother? But then she goes on to say, if you fail to achieve anything at all, then you can go freaking die. You are forsaken. You will be nothing but a sacrifice. Like, holy crap, Mom, geez. Marika has very, very high expectations for her children, and she does not seem to have any sympathy for those who fail to meet those expectations. The potential death of her children does not appear to bother her, especially if she deems them failures. This is the environment Godwyn would have been raised in, one of very high pressure and equally high stakes. Achieve something great or be forsaken. Well, as we follow the next chapter in his story, we'll see that Godwyn did achieve something great, but perhaps not great enough in his mother's eyes. Now, this is the point in his story where we can stop making generalized inferences based on circumstantial evidence and start basing his biography on solid textual evidence. In the royal capital of Leyndell, we can find the long dead, long petrified corpse of a truly colossal dragon. The description of the Bolt of Grandsax explains who this dragon was, which reads, a great ancient dragon, Grandsax, once rained calamity upon the royal capital, the only time in the historical record that Leyndell's walls have fallen. This marked the dawn of the war against the ancient dragons. To hear more about this war and Godwyn's involvement, we're going to read 2 more pieces of text. As we examine both of these, ask yourself, what do the writers want you to think about Godwyn here? How do they intend for you to feel about him? Okay, first up is this battle monument in the Altus Plateau, whose inscription reads, the routing of the ancient dragons. Godwyn the Golden fought to the last, earning the friendship of Dread Fortisax. And next, let's look at the description for the Lightning Spear incantation, which reads, long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax, and befriended his fallen foe. an event that gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital. Alright, so this little tidbit tells us a lot about the character of Godwyn the Golden. Firstly, he is the only character mentioned by name in relation to the war against the ancient dragons, which suggests he was a great champion of that war. I think the writers want us to perceive him as a very stereotypical medieval fantasy hero. He is a great warrior, he is a dragon slayer, who are often the greatest warriors in their stories. But more than that, he is honorable and noble. He can turn friends into foes. When he defeats an enemy, he will offer mercy, will offer his hand in friendship. Later, we'll see that even after death, Fortisax remained by his side. Godwyn inspired a loyalty in Fortisax that is really remarkable. This war would have been fought at the absolute apex of the Golden Order, when it was at its most powerful and most honorable, and Godwyn's exploits reflect that apex. But there is a darkness here too. Throughout all of this, Godwyn's two brothers were held in shackles in the putrid sewers beneath the capital city, banished and forsaken, and as far as we know, he never did anything to help them. Even at its best, there was always a sickness and violence underneath the shining surface of the Golden Order, and the end of the Order is heralded by the murder of Godwyn. At nearly the same time as the Elden Ring is shattered, his life is shattered too, symbolizing the end of all that is golden, the end of honor and nobility, the end of the glorious dynasty, never again to reach its former power or prosperity. It's an event known as the Night of the Black Knives, and while it is discussed in depth by multiple characters, there is still much about it that we don't know. Here's what we do know. This was a complicated plot hatched by his cousin, Ranni the Witch, to overthrow the Greater Will, the outer god whose influence dominates the Golden Order, and its envoys, the Two Fingers. It appears that, for some reason, she needed to kill herself to release herself from its grip. She stole the Rune of Death and used it to kill both herself and Godwyn. Simultaneously, she used something called the Curse Mark of Death, which is seemingly separate from the Rune of Death, to allow her to live on in spirit despite the death of her flesh, at the same time to allow Godwyn to live on in flesh alone despite the destruction of his soul, so neither of them fully died. Looking at the item description of the Blasphemous Claw, it appears that another member of his extended family, Rykard, was also in on the plot. And there is also the fact that the assassins had close ties to his own mother, but it's hard to know what to make of that. Could Marika really have been involved in the murder of her own son? From that little snippet of dialogue we heard earlier, she did not seem all that upset by the idea of her children being forsaken or sacrificed. Would she be willing to let Godwyn be sacrificed to the much greater ambitions of Ranni? But we just don't know. Either way, it was a broad conspiracy involving multiple members of his own family, a terrible betrayal. Let's try to look at this from Godwyn's perspective. It probably would have been a normal night in the capital. He would have felt safe. Maybe he noticed something off here and there, or maybe he never noticed anything at all. And then, suddenly, without any warning, everything goes wrong. He is surrounded by assassins. Imagine the shock and the terror of that moment. Remember, Godwyn is both a great warrior and a great diplomat. He would have fought back. It would have been a brutal and bloody battle, but he was caught by surprise and hopelessly outnumbered. At some point, he must have realized that he was going to die, and he never knew why. He never knew who these assassins were or who had sent them, but they did not just kill him. It was crucial to the plan that his body live on in death so that the curse mark could be divided in half. The whole point of the plan was to let Ranni dispose of her own body, and thus dispose of the influence of the Two Fingers, so she could continue the rebellion in spirit form. So they capture him, hold him down, and viciously carve half a magical symbol into his body. This half of the curse mark allows his flesh to live on in death, despite the destruction of his soul. Soon after his death, Queen Marika shatters the Elden Ring and disappears along with Radagon. There is no ruler of the lands between anymore. A civil war erupts. The kingdom is corrupted and destroyed. In this way, the death of Godwyn is really the death of the Golden Order, except, just like him, it does not die a true death. The Golden Order stumbles forward in a zombified state, a perpetual stalemate, each of the demigods lost or broken, incapable of becoming the next ruler. So what happens when your soul dies but your body lives on? Well, his body transforms into this nightmarish, inhuman monstrosity. His flesh becomes horrific, and strangest of all, something called Deathroot grows out of his flesh. This twisted black plant spreads to every corner of the lands between, and wherever it goes, its touch brings corpses back to life. A plague of the dead consumes the entire kingdom. They are known as those who live in death, and are hunted by Golden Order fundamentalists, like D for supposedly corrupting the Order. The visual design of the Deathroot reminds me of the design of the Bed of Chaos back in the first Dark Souls. The Bed of Chaos was also portrayed as this twisted, horrific plant growing out of control. In both cases, I think the twisted plant structure is meant to represent this idea of nature going wild, chaotic, not being governed or controlled by the ordinary natural laws anymore. Back in Dark Souls, it was meant to literally represent chaos. In Elden Ring, it seems to represent the cycle of life and death itself going out of control, no longer working the way it's supposed to. But let's talk about an alternative theory here. When we find his corpse, it has a fishtail and a deformed, misshapen head. There are two possibilities. The first is that his body was transformed after death, a thematic representation of this idea of nature and the cycle of life and death going out of control. The second possibility is that his body was always deformed and fish-like, even back when he was alive. That is something that some players believe. There are no images of what Godwyn looked like before his death anywhere in the lands between, and the only image in-game, the one in the opening cinematic, does not show either his head or his legs. There is, however, a single image of him outside of the game in the story trailer, which does portray him as having a normal human head, but also does not show his legs. I think it fits his story better if he was born human and then his body was corrupted and mutated at the same time as the Golden Order was. But I thought it was worth mentioning that there are alternative theories. Anyway, Godwyn's story is not over yet. As I said at the beginning of the video, just as the Golden Order can be reborn in a new form at the end of the game, so can he. This is Fia, one of the 5 legendary Tarnished mentioned by name in the opening cinematic. Each of these Tarnished holds the power to transform the lands between to bring about a new age. Fia is a deathbed companion. Her purpose is to lay with multiple champions, to absorb their warmth, their energy, and then to lay with the corpse of an exalted noble, to transfer the warmth of champions into his cold body, and thus grant him a second chance at life. We can actually see her doing this in the opening, laying with the desiccated skeleton of a king in a tomb, surrounded by the skulls of the dead. When she arrives in the lands between, she chooses to lay with the corpse of Godwyn, to bring him back to life, in a bid to end the persecution of those who live in death. The first time I played the game, I assumed she was going to bring his corpse back to life. So, who knows how many centuries after his death, Godwyn would suddenly wake up to find his body transformed into a hideous, horrific new shape, to find that everyone he had ever known and loved is long dead, and that his home has been twisted and shattered, which would definitely be upsetting. But that is not what happens to him in Fia's ending. He does come back to life, but not in this form. To understand what actually does happen to him, let's listen to Fia herself explain it.
I will soon lay with Godwyn, and it will surely stir within me the new life of the Golden Prince, and first dead of the demigods, as the rune of those who live in death. Please, do one thing for me. Brandish this child, my rune, and take for yourself the throne. Stay the persecution of those who live in death by becoming...
In this dialogue, she explicitly says, Godwyn's new life is going to stir inside of her, and that new life is going to take the form of this rune. So how is this possible? What exactly does she mean? Well, from the description of the Elden Remembrance, we know that the Elden Ring is the Elden Beast. The Elden Ring is a collection of great runes, and it is alive. It is sentient and conscious, capable of defending itself. In this game, runes are alive, or at least some of them. And this rune, Fia's Mending Rune of the Death Prince, this is his soul, his life, somehow reborn within her body, along with the completed curse mark. This is not the only mending rune in the game. There are 3 total, and each of them is intended to both repair and transform the Elden Ring, and along with it, the Golden Order. With this mending rune, the principle of those who live in death will be enshrined within the Elden Ring, making it a central aspect of the new order. As a result, the way the cycle of life and death functions will be forever changed. In this way, Godwyn's life has once again been dramatically transformed. But exactly what part of him exists within this rune? His consciousness, his memories, his experiences, his personality? Is he aware? Does he have the capacity for thoughts and feelings in this form? Will he feel pain? Will he feel sorrow for what has happened to him and his family and his home? Or will he just be subsumed into the larger consciousness of the Elden Beast, until the day comes when the Elden Ring is again broken and transformed? Whatever the case, this is a form of life totally different and alien to our own. It is such a bizarre form of life that it is hard to make any sense out of it at all. As I've stated multiple times, Godwyn the Golden story is the story of the Golden Order. When it begins, it is glorious and honorable and perfect, but hiding darkness and fracture lines underneath. Later, it becomes broken and twisted and corrupted and horrific, living on in a zombified form. But then, with the coming of the Tarnished, it has a chance to be reborn into a new form, a second life, very different than the first. In the end, its true essence is stranger than anything we could have expected, arcane and esoteric, full of meaning and consequence we cannot fully understand. This is the last video I will post before the release of Shadow of the Erdtree. It's actually probably going to be posted the same day. I will be quiet for a couple weeks while I play through the new expansion. The next time I post, it will be to examine whatever new characters and stories we discover in Miquella's Land of Shadow. So, see you on the other side.